It was 8:42 on a rainy Saturday morning when my father looked at my 6-year-old son, pointed toward the front door, and said the sentence that changed every single part of my life. Take him and leave. We don't want him. That in this family. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. My son Ethan was standing beside me, clutching the little sketchbook he carried everywhere. He wasn't crying, he wasn't yelling. He was quietly drawing raindrops on the corner of the page, while my parents stared at him like he was some kind of embarrassment. Then my mother folded her arms and whispered the words, "I'll never forget him. You should have put him in a special institution instead of bringing him here." I felt every muscle in my body freeze, but I thought that was the worst part. I was wrong. Ethan had been diagnosed with autism only 8 months earlier. The diagnosis hadn't changed who he was. He still laughed whenever pigeons landed near him. He still memorized every color in a sunset. He still covered every spare piece of paper with drawings that somehow looked more alive than photographs. The only thing that changed was how people treated him, especially my parents. Growing up, I always believed family stayed together through hard times. That illusion died in my parents' living room. After my divorce, money had become painfully tight. My ex-wife had decided motherhood wasn't the life she wanted. She signed away custody without much argument. Since then, it had been just Ethan and me. I worked long shifts repairing commercial HVAC systems. Every spare dollar went toward therapy, speech sessions, occupational appointments, rent, groceries, and whatever tiny joy I could afford for Ethan. When my landlord sold the apartment building, I suddenly had 30 days to move. I had nowhere else to go. So, swallowing every ounce of pride I had, I called my parents. My mother sounded surprisingly warm on the phone. Of course, you can stay for a little while." I actually believed she meant it. Looking back now, that phone call was the beginning of everything. The first evening wasn't terrible. Ethan sat quietly in the corner drawing the family dog from memory. My father barely acknowledged him. My mother kept making comments. He doesn't look at people. He doesn't answer quickly. He's odd. I kept explaining. He processes differently. He's overwhelmed. He just needs time. Neither of them listened. The second day, Ethan accidentally knocked over a crystal vase after getting startled by the vacuum cleaner. It shattered across the hardwood floor. He immediately covered his ears and dropped to his knees. He wasn't throwing a tantrum. He was overwhelmed by the sound. I rushed over. "It's okay, buddy." But before I could comfort him, my father stormed into the room. "For God's sake, control your kid!" Ethan started rocking. That only made things worse. My mother looked at him with open disgust. "Normal children don't act like this." I wanted to scream. Instead, I cleaned up every piece of broken glass while apologizing for something that wasn't anyone's fault. A few nights later, everything exploded. We were eating dinner. Ethan wasn't speaking much. He was carefully arranging peas into perfect circles on his plate. It helped him stay calm. My father slammed his fork onto the table. "This is ridiculous." Nobody answered. Then he looked directly at me. "You're wasting your life," I frowned. "What? He's never going to have a normal future." The room went silent. My mother nodded. "You're still young. You could start over." I stared at them. "What exactly are you saying?" My father leaned back. "I'm saying your life would be easier without him." I felt my stomach twist. "You want me to abandon my son?" "I'm saying stop pretending he'll ever be successful." Before I realized what I was doing, I stood up so quickly, my chair tipped backward. "Don't you ever say that again." Ethan looked up from his plate. His hands started shaking. He hated loud voices. My mother sighed dramatically. "See, he ruins every family dinner." I grabbed Ethan's backpack. My father pointed toward the hallway. "Take him and leave. Outside now." Then came the sentence I still hear in nightmares. "We're disowning both of you." The rain hit us before we reached the sidewalk. I had one backpack, two trash bags of clothes. $214 in my checking account, and nowhere to sleep. But what happened next shocked me. That night we slept inside my old pickup truck. I parked behind the warehouse where I worked because the security lights stayed on all night. Ethan never complained. He simply looked through the windshield. The rain sounds pretty. I turned away so he wouldn't see me crying. Monday morning, my manager found us. His name was Carl. He had spent 20 years pretending to be the toughest man in the building. When he saw Ethan asleep in the passenger seat, everything changed. He didn't ask embarrassing questions. He simply handed me a motel key. My brother owns the place. I already paid for the week. I tried refusing. He shook his head. You can pay somebody else forward someday. That kindness saved us. I wish I had known where it would eventually lead. Weeks became months. Months became years. Life wasn't easy. I picked up weekend shifts, night shifts, emergency calls, anything that paid overtime. Ethan kept going to therapy. Slowly, painfully, he began speaking more. His therapist noticed something incredible. Whenever Ethan couldn't explain his feelings with words, he painted them, not childish finger paintings, real paintings, complex that let, full of emotion. His therapist asked where he'd learned. I laughed. No one taught him. She looked at me. Someone should. Those words changed everything. I couldn't afford expensive art lessons, so every Friday after work we'd visit the local library. We borrowed every book about painting we could find. We watched free tutorials, bought secondhand brushes, used leftover house paint when proper supplies cost too much. Our apartment slowly filled with canvases. Sunsets, birds, rain, faces, hands, and Enden. Things most people ignored. Ethan noticed everything. One evening, I found him staring through our kitchen window. "What are you painting?" Without looking away, he answered quietly. "Lonely light." I didn't understand, then I saw it. Across the street, one apartment window glowed while every other apartment was dark. He painted loneliness better than most adults could describe it. That's when I realized. My son wasn't broken. The world simply didn't know how to see him. Then something happened that changed everything. At age 14, Ethan entered a local youth art competition. There were nearly 400 entries. We almost didn't go. He hated crowds, the noise, the lights, the unfamiliar people. Just before judging began, he whispered, "Dad, can we leave?" I knelt beside him. "We can. You don't have to prove anything." He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "My painting wants to stay." I smiled. "So does mine." When the awards started, Ethan covered his ears. He wasn't paying attention. Then the announcer stopped speaking. "I'd like the young artist behind Silent Orbit to come forward." That was Ethan's painting. He didn't move. He thought someone else had won. People started clapping. I gently touched his shoulder. "Buddy, that's you." He slowly walked to the stage while avoiding everyone's eyes. The entire room stood up. Not because of pity, because they'd never seen anything like his work. He won first place. A retired gallery owner approached us afterward. She introduced herself as Margaret. "I've collected art for 40 years. She looked directly at Ethan. "You paint emotions people don't know they have." I expected she was simply being polite. She wasn't. Over the next 2 years, she mentored him for free. She refused payment. He doesn't need money. He needs someone who believes in him. Something my own parents never managed to do. Looking back now, that was the moment our future quietly began changing. Though neither of us could have imagined just how dramatically it would change. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was replacing a rooftop air conditioning unit. I almost ignored it because I didn't recognize the number. If I had, none of what happened next would have unfolded the way it did. "Mr. Carter?" the woman asked. "This is he. My name is Claire. I'm calling from the Hamilton Contemporary Gallery in New York. Your son's painting, Silent Orbit 2, has just been sold." I smiled. "That's wonderful. Ethan will be thrilled." There was a brief pause before she added, "The final bid was $2,300,000. I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. I'm sorry. Did you say 230,000? No, sir, 2.3 million. For a moment, the sounds of the construction site disappeared. I couldn't hear the drills or the traffic below. All I could think about was the little boy who once painted raindrops in a motel room because I couldn't afford toys. I drove home in complete silence. When I walked through the apartment door, Ethan was sitting exactly where I expected him to be, painting beside the window. He looked up. You got the phone call. I laughed. How did you know? They emailed me first. I walked over and hugged him tighter than I ever had before. I'm so proud of you. He hugged me back for exactly 3 seconds. He always counted hugs, then he smiled. We don't have to worry anymore, Dad. I looked at him and realized something. We had never been chasing money, we had been chasing peace, but I never expected success to reopen the darkest chapter of our lives. 3 days later, my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number immediately. It was my mother's. The same woman who hadn't spoken to us in 12 years. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then she called again and again. Then came a voicemail. Sweetheart, we've made terrible mistakes. We'd really like to see our grandson. Grandson, for 12 years he'd been that child. Now he was suddenly her grandson. I deleted the voicemail. The next morning flowers arrived at our front door. No card. Only a small note. Family deserves another chance. I threw them away. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, Ethan and I were leaving the gallery after an interview when I saw them standing across the street. My parents, they looked older. My father's shoulders had slumped. My mother's hair had turned almost completely gray. For a split second, I saw the people who had raised me. Then I remembered the rainy afternoon they pointed my 6-year-old toward the door. My father stepped forward. Son, I raised my hand. Don't. He stopped. We've been trying to reach you. I noticed. My mother started crying almost instantly. We've missed you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You missed us? 12 birthdays, 12 Christmases, 12 years without one phone call. You didn't miss us. You missed what he became. Neither of them answered. Then my father looked at Ethan. We're proud of you. Ethan quietly replied without looking at him. You don't know me. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. But what happened next shocked me. A reporter walked over. She had recognized us from the interview inside. Would you mind taking a family photo? Before I could answer, my mother wrapped her arm around Ethan as if nothing had ever happened. He froze. He hated unexpected touch. He carefully stepped away. No, thank you. His voice was calm. I only take pictures with safe people. The reporter looked confused. My parents looked embarrassed. I simply said, We're done here. We walked away. I thought that would finally end it. Instead, things became uglier. Within a week, my parents started giving interviews online. They described themselves as loving grandparents who had lost contact after a misunderstanding. Some people believed them. Comments began appearing under Ethan's interviews. Reconnect with your family. Forgiveness matters. They seemed sorry. I could see the confusion on Ethan's face. Why are strangers telling us what happened? I didn't have an answer. Then Margaret called. You should know something. She emailed me copies of several articles. My parents weren't just telling their story. They were hinting that Ethan's success was a result of strong artistic genes inherited from our family. They even implied they had encouraged his creativity as a child. That was the moment I decided silence was no longer kindness. It was surrender. A documentary filmmaker had been following Ethan's journey for almost 2 years. Most of the footage had never been released. Hours of video, old photographs, therapy sessions, our tiny apartment, his first paintings, even recordings from the motel where we had stayed after being thrown out. I asked the filmmaker one question. Did you keep everything? She smiled. Everything. A month later, the documentary premiered. I sat beside Ethan in a packed theater, halfway through the film. The screen showed 6-year-old Ethan sitting in that motel room. He quietly asked me, "Dad, are Grandma and Grandpa mad forever?" The audience fell completely silent. Then came another clip, me working nights. Falling asleep at the kitchen table, Ethan placing a blanket over my shoulders before going back to paint. People around us began wiping away tears. But the moment that changed everything came near the end. The filmmaker had somehow obtained security footage from my parents' old house. The audio was clear. My father's voice echoed through the theater. "Take him and leave." Then my mother's. "We don't want that in this family." No narration, no editing tricks, just the truth. When the lights came back on, nobody applauded for several seconds. Many people were crying. The next morning, every interview my parents had given disappeared from the internet. Their neighbors learned the truth. Their church learned the truth. Their friends learned the truth. No lawsuit, no screaming. No revenge fueled by anger, just the truth. And the truth was stronger than anything they had invented. I thought that was the final chapter. Then my father requested one last meeting. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not for him, for myself. We met in a quiet park. He looked exhausted. "I've lost almost everyone." I nodded. "I know. I came to apologize." I looked at him carefully. "No. You came because everyone else knows what you did." His eyes filled with tears. "I was ashamed. You were ashamed of him. No, you were ashamed of yourself." For the first time in my life, he didn't argue. He simply lowered his head. A few minutes later, my mother quietly arrived. She carried a small cardboard box. Inside were Ethan's childhood drawings, the ones he'd left behind 12 years earlier. "We kept them," she whispered. I looked through them slowly. Every single page was neatly protected in plastic sleeves. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Then I realized something important. Keeping the drawings hadn't erased abandoning the child who created them. I closed the box. "You can regret your choices, but you can't rewrite them." My mother broke down crying. "Will he ever forgive us?" I looked toward the lake where Ethan was feeding ducks with Margaret. "I can't answer that. Forgiveness belongs to the person you hurt." Before leaving, my father quietly asked him, "Can we at least tell him we're sorry?" I walked over to Ethan. "They'd like to apologize." He watched the ducks for nearly a minute before speaking. "When I was little, I thought they didn't love me because I was different." He looked at me. "Now I know they didn't love what they didn't understand." He turned toward them. "I don't hate you, but I don't need you anymore." There wasn't a trace of anger in his voice, only peace, and somehow that hurt them far more than shouting ever could. A year later, Ethan opened a foundation that provided free art supplies and mentorship for autistic children whose families couldn't afford programs. On opening day, dozens of kids filled the studio with paint, laughter, and colors that covered almost every wall. Before the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Ethan handed me a framed painting. It showed a rainy parking lot, an old pickup truck, a father sitting in the driver's seat, a little boy drawing beside him. Across the bottom, in his careful handwriting, were 8 simple words. "You never abandoned me, so I found myself." I couldn't speak, not because of the millions, not because of the galleries, not because the world finally recognized his talent. I cried because the little boy everyone had dismissed had grown into a man who saw beauty where others saw flaws. My parents had disowned my son because they believed he would never amount to anything. They measured his worth by what he couldn't do. The world discovered his worth by seeing what he could. They lost 12 years chasing the idea of a perfect family. I spent those same 12 years raising an extraordinary son. And in the end, they didn't lose him because he became rich. They lost him the day they chose prejudice over love. And for the first time in years, I finally felt free.